Hello, everybody. Thanks for inviting me into your houses. I'll not leave a mess. I'll tidy up afterwards. I hope you can all see that screen. Can I get a thumbs up from Stacey? That is, so yeah, excellent. And as Stacey said, for my sins, my background is in mathematics and politics, although of course these weren't my day job, but for over 50 years I've been running elections, so wee bit experience. So anyway, I'll dive into this, and bear with me. The first part is the mathematics part, and then we move on to the politics of it, which is really important and often gets missed out. So I'll start with the mathematics. And first of all, talk about the voting systems in use in Scotland. And of course, I know most people will know this, but it's worth fixing this in mind that our electors see these different voting systems. So we have to explain them whenever we're campaigning. And the local government elections, of course, are a 1, 2, 3 mark according to your preference. The Westminster elections, 1X on the ballot box. But the Scottish Parliament election is a bit unique with 2 ballot papers, the constituency ballot paper and the regional list ballot paper. And this is really a message we've got to get through. It's not a second vote, it's 2 separate votes. And in the 2016 election, and during this, I'm going to talk a lot from actual facts. I know I've seen some of the SIP and things like that who are making up phenomenal suggestions of what votes might be. I'm going to base this all on real numbers. So that was the 2016 election result, where there are 73 constituency MSPs and 56 list MSPs. These are also, list MSPs are pretty critical to getting a majority. We are too short of having a majority in the Scottish Parliament, which means we operate as a minority government, which restricts us quite a lot. In fact, let's have a look at Mid-Scotland and Fife and the changes that were from 2011. And the SNP dropped 1 list seat from the list vote, and its list vote went down. So this is something we've got to overcome, because when our list vote goes down, we lose list MSPs. So the best way to look at it is look at how does the Scottish Parliament election system work. So sit comfortably. I'm going to explain the D'Hondt system, which is really exciting. Of course, the first ballot paper is the first past the post. The candidate with the most votes is elected, but the list vote is decided by the modified D'Hondt system. It's not a pure D'Hondt system for the nerds. That's, I think, only really operated in Israel. The modified one is quite common, places like Germany. And the votes are counted up for each party, and there are 7 seats per region allocated by this formula down here. And if you can go with that formula, that explains it. That's a fairly simplified way of explaining it. That's applied at each stage as they're working out the allocation of a list MSP. So when we dive into it, here's the starting point for Mid-Scotland and Fife. And the SNP had 41.3% of the votes, and it won 8 constituency seats. There's the Tory vote, the Labour vote, the Green vote, the Lib Dem vote. And this column Indy what I've done is I've added together Rise and Solidarity together because it's such a small vote. So that's the starting point. No party's got any regional seats. It goes through a stage at a time. On the first stage, the SNP had 8 seats. So using that formula, number MSPs plus 1, we divide 9 into our share of the vote, and we end up with 4.6. For the Tories, they had no MSPs, so you add 1 to that by the formula, divide it into 25.2, gives the answer of 25.2. Labour, no MSPs, so add 1 to it, divide into their share of the vote, gives them 17.6, and so on down the line for each of them. So the Tories had the biggest answer out of that, so they get allocated the first MSP, so they gain 1. So when we get to stage 2, the Tories now have a list MSP. So their total votes is divided by 2, giving an answer of 12.6. SNP vote remains as it was. The Labour vote remained as it was, and so on. So Labour now have the highest answer, so they get allocated a list MSP, continuing to use that formula all the time. Then at stage 3, Labour now have 1 MSP, so we're dividing their share of the votes by 2, giving an answer of 8.8. All the others are unchanged, so the Tories now have the highest answer, so they get the next list MSP. Stage 4, now the Tories have 2 list MSPs, so we're dividing by 3 into their share of the vote, giving 8.4. And Labour remain on the same because they didn't gain a MSP at the previous stage. So they're on 8.8. They've got the highest number. So they get allocated the next list MSP. You're starting to see the pattern. It's fairly straightforward, actually. Stage 5, right? We now, the Tories are now at 8.4 because they were unchanged from the previous stage. But Labour, because they'd now got 2 MSPs, were dividing by 3. They're on 5.9. You notice how the numbers are starting to converge. And they're very much decided by the share of the vote. At stage 6, the Tories get another MSP because although they had 3, dividing 4 into their share of the vote gave an answer of 6.3 ahead of all the others, so they get the next allocation. And in the final stage, it's the Greens' turn, and they get allocated 1. So that's how the seats are allocated. It's a bit deceptive when some people say, you know, 10,000, 20,000 votes needed, things like that. It's not the number of votes, it's the share of the vote that is important in the calculation of list seats. Because obviously, if you manage to push your vote up, someone else is going to lose votes. They're going to go down. So it has the effect of a multiplier. So it's a share of the vote that's calculated on. So that's how we get there. That's how we got there in 2016. So we have to look at how important the list vote is to the SNP. Well, first of all, if we look at the constituency vote in Mid-Scotland and Fife, I added up the constituent vote and all the constituencies, it was 46%. but our list vote was 41.3. So that's a 4.7 difference between them. That's people who voted for the SNP on the constituency but didn't vote for them on the list. That's leakage. And that's what we first of all want to try and eliminate, to get rid of the leakage, but also it would be really powerful to get our list vote over 50% to show that we had the support of the people of Scotland. So let's have a look at if we managed to get a list vote to 50%. And here's what would have happened. We would have had 8 constituency seats, but we'd also have won a list seat as well. Quite feasible to do this if we can get our campaigning in the right footage. But also remember, again, this is not a fact. This is making up a scenario. But if we manage to increase that, obviously these ones start to decrease. So that makes it even more likely that you get another list seat. And this is supposed to be impossible. Remember, people are telling you that you can't win all the constituency seats and get a list seat. Well, we did in North East Scotland in 2011, and that's the actual result. So let's have a look at the impact of each independence party on the list, because they need to get at least 5% of the list vote to gain a seat. That's the way the mathematics of this works out. Now, John Curtis said the Scottish voters don't favour new parties in the list. And he's right. And you can see that from history. You can see that from the performance of Solidarity and Rise. In fact, the established Greens achieved only 6.6%, and they've been running since 1999 in Scottish Parliament elections. Whereas Solidarity, 2 years in to campaigning at the 2016 election, achieved only 0.6%. Rise, running their first year at Scottish Parliament election, got 0.5%. So additional windy parties, they'll take votes from established ones, but they're not going to get to that breakthrough level that would give them MSPs. So a big worry for us, especially looking where the list vote is sitting in the polls at the moment, is that they could take away enough votes from the SNP and possibly the Greens as well. In fact, they might have more to worry about, that would actually eliminate our list MSPs, and we could end up with a unionist majority in the Scottish Parliament, which is certainly not what anybody wants to achieve. And we learn a lot from looking at the actual figures of 2016. And here's the little parties: UKIP, Solidarity, the Scottish Christians, Rise. UKIP getting 2%, Solidarity 0.6%. They don't get an MSP. These are really wasted votes. And let's look at the changes from 2011 to 2016. Now, in 2016, we actually increased our constituency vote in the Scottish Parliament election. It went up by 1.1%, and that gave us an extra 6 MSPs on the constituency, taking us to 59. But our problem was our percentage on the list, the regional votes, went down by 2.3%. And that contributed to a loss of 12 seats. Now, that's pretty important to note. You know, that caused us a lot of problems and meant we dropped by 6 MSPs and we were down into a minority government of 63. Remember, you need 65 MSPs to have a majority. And by contrast, look at this. Here's the Scottish Greens. They went up by 2.2%. Strangely enough, almost the same. They ran a, remember, Second Vote Green campaign, and that got them an extra 4 MSPs. That's the way the multiplier works. Actually, putting more votes onto the list for the SNP would have a bigger effect than putting them on anywhere else. And if we look at the 2016 election, and again, these are real figures working on it, if the list vote had matched the constituency vote, we would have had an overall majority of 3. So if only we could eliminate that leakage between the constituency vote and the list vote, we get an SNP majority government. And I'll go on to talk about the reasons why we need that and the politics of it. And we're starting to emerge into that here. So what happens if more indie parties contest the list? Well, they're very unlikely to breach a 5% effective breakpoint, and therefore they'll get no seats. And the SNP and Green vote would probably reduce, maybe by a small amount, but you can see the effect that 2.3% drop in votes has. So that's a big worry for us. And in the unlikely event they ever got one, and I don't think there's any chance that's going to happen, they have no policies, you don't know how they would vote. It'd be a bit of a pig in a poke. And apart from independence, how would they vote in the Scottish Parliament? How would they vote on budget matters? Remember that most of the votes in the Scottish Parliament have nothing to do with independence. They're about running the country. And so we don't know how they would behave. So they have the potential to vote down the SNP government budget, as the Greens have threatened to. And that could lead to an SNP government resignation. What would that do for independence? And some people say, well, why not just give a second vote to the Greens? Aren't they independent supporters? And they could form a coalition with SNP. Well, the Greens have already turned down coalitions with the SNP. Remember, they operate in opposition. Independence isn't their key policy, their Green policies override it. I'll explain that in a second. Because they have a track record of threatening to bring down the SNP government, and this would kill our chances of independence. Their votes against the SNP government are quite common, actually. And implementing some of the Green Party policies, like not building the Sheriff Hall flyover outside Edinburgh, or even worse, not building the Queensferry crossing. Remember, the Greens were opposed to that. They'd be massive vote losers. And from our colleagues there in Fife, I can't imagine what the effect would that have on the vote if we'd gone along with them, because they wanted us, remember, to cancel the Queensferry crossing. So you can't predict how many constituencies the SNP will win. We just don't know. So therefore, how many list seats do we need to get a majority? We don't know. You might be thinking, well, the opinion polls. Well, we'll come to that in a minute. So a minority SNP government, even if the Greens support it on independence issues, it doesn't command legitimacy in the UK and international eyes, and therefore is political leverage. Now, this is the politics of it. In 2011, we had a majority. We had that legitimacy, which mean Alec could go down to Westminster and demand that Section 30, and there was little that David Cameron could do about it, because we were the majority government. We had it. So if we lose that majority, We lose control over the key constitutional committees in the Scottish Parliament, which is really important because that's where the details are all there. And confusing messages on the list vote don't win support. So any message like vote this in one place but differently in another and so on, it's just too complicated. You need straightforward, simple messages to get over to the public. So let's have a look at these opinion polls and see whether we could build a strategy based on them. So this is the rolling 30-day average of opinion polls in the run-up to the 2016 election. It's always worth looking back and learning from what went on. These are the actual figures. And the constituency poll peaked on a 30-day rolling average at 60%. There were a few outliers that were higher, but this is the average, right? So, and the list vote peaked at 54%. Now, we haven't reached those figures in the current run-up to the 2021 election. And I'll be frank, that worries me a bit, because you see what happens after the peak as the unionist media creeps in and starts kicking us and coming out all its scare stories, and the BBC, etc., turns its screw on. The polls drop 13% in the run-up to the 2016 election from their peak in both the constituency vote and the list vote. So that's why I'm saying you can't predict the number of MSPs you'll get elected based on how the opinion polls are now. We have to learn from that.